In our last podcast, we talked about the disappearance of someone who was supposedly last known to be at an airport. In this podcast, we are going to continue to talk about mysterious and tragic cases of people who disappeared after last being seen at the airport. Even though we do know some of the details of their disappearance, there are still so many unanswered questions in these bizarre cases. First, let's talk about Margie Dabney. Joe and Margie Dabney had been married for 34 years. Joe was 63 and Margie was 70. They originally lived in Indianapolis, but for the last few years they had resided in Bakersfield, California. They had 10 children between them. The couple had also been facing health challenges at the time of this mystery. Joe had been in an automobile accident years prior that left him with a lot of pain in his hips that would now require surgery. Margie had diabetes and had been suffering the effects of Alzheimer's disease as well for the past year. Since Margie could not be left alone with her Alzheimer's, the original plan was for her to stay with her daughter in Indianapolis while Joe stayed in Bakersfield and had his hip surgery. He would be also preparing a new apartment that the couple was set to move into. This way Margie would be looked after. However, Margie would continue to wander off while staying with her daughter, one time even going to a nearby hospital to look for her husband. For fear of her mother's safety, Margie's daughter, Candace Price, had been forced to lock her mother in the house during the times when she had to leave the home. When Joe Dabney heard this, he decided to put off his hip surgery and flew back to Indianapolis to retrieve his wife. On Wednesday, December 5th, 2001, the Dabneys were scheduled to fly back home to California. They flew on an American Airlines flight from Indianapolis to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport on a 2.5-hour flight. They had a layover and were then to board a flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Los Angeles, located at the same terminal. The family had made accommodations ahead of time due to Joe needing a wheelchair and Margie needing an attendant due to her Alzheimer's. After the flight arrived at 10 a.m., the Dabneys waited while the other passengers left the plane. Then a specially trained attendant who worked for a company contracted by American Airlines assisted the couple. They would push Joe in the wheelchair while Margie walked alongside. The accounts differ slightly, but the most told version is that the couple needed to use the restroom. The male attendant asked Margie if she could meet them at the connecting gate. Margie nodded that she understood and pointed in the direction of the gate. They then watched her enter the restroom. The attendant then accompanied Joe inside the men's restroom to assist him. When he finished, he pushed Joe to gate 39. Minutes would go by and Marjorie didn't meet them there. He soon began to worry. Where was his wife? When Margie didn't arrive at the gate, after a few minutes, the attendant asked a female attendant to look for her in the women's restroom, but Margie was not inside. Meanwhile, Joe's concern was turning into panic. Soon after, the airport's Department of Public Safety was called. They began to look for his wife. They went from one end of the airport to the other and asked everybody that they encountered, but no one had seen Margie Dabney. Joe Dabney was insistent that his wife needed to be found, but there wasn't much that he could do himself due to his mobility. After searching as much as he could, Joe Dabney was put on an afternoon flight to Los Angeles without his wife, heartbroken and confused. There was still no sign of Margie, and a few days later, American Airlines flew Joe back to Texas to once again help in the search. Some family members would join him. As you can imagine, the Dabneys' children were incensed. They were angry at American Airlines, who didn't phone the police for at least 2 hours after they knew Margie was missing. They were also upset with the airport's Department of Public Safety, who waited 2 days before informing the public of the disappearance and asking for their help. The case would get some more publicity when O.J. Simpson's former trial lawyer, Johnny Cochran, joined in the search. One report said that the family hired him to help in the search as well as for legal advice. A week after the disappearance, the FBI would join in the investigation. Margie's name was also entered into a national database for missing persons. The airport police combed the 18,000-acre area for the lost woman, but at this point had their doubts if she was even still on the property. Her youngest daughter, Candace Price, would soon fly to Texas to join in the search. The airlines would pay for her trip, lodging, and a rental car for a month, while she put up countless flyers and searched for her mother. Airport officials would receive about 20 calls during the first week. One was from a motorist who saw a woman matching Margie's description collecting cans on the northwest side of the airport. Another sighting of a woman collecting cans along Interstate 35. Candace's husband, Kerry, also spoke with an attendant at a service station who was sure that Margie Dabney was in his store on Friday, 2 days after the disappearance. He described the woman as wearing a black coat and colorful scarf, which matched the clothing Margie was wearing when she went missing. There were also a few reported sightings of Margie on the airport property in restricted areas, both by a construction worker and a pilot in the days after she disappeared. Just 3 weeks after Margie disappeared, another woman would go missing from the exact same airport. Cheryl Cavillo's flight from San Antonio arrived on Wednesday, December 26, between 1:45 and 2:45 p.m. from American Airlines. She was last seen at 5 p.m. when she tried to obtain another ticket at an American Airlines counter for the 7:15 p.m. flight to Kansas City. When she was told the ticket agent that she lost her ticket, she was told that she needed to pay the $100 exchange fee. She then left the counter. The agent assumed that she left to get the money. That same day, about 5:45 p.m., Cheryl Cavillo phoned her parents to tell them that she missed her flight. She called her parents again at a Conoco service station. Around 6 p.m., Cavillo's parents received a third telephone call from their daughter. This time she was using a cell phone that was not hers. It was mentioned that the 42-year-old Cavillo may have mental or learning disabilities. Thankfully, she was found unharmed 4 days later around midnight at a Euless Waffle House. She didn't know where she was or how to get anywhere, so she'd phoned her boyfriend, and he had phoned police who went to the Waffle House and located her. But with one missing person found, Margie Dabney was still missing. Law enforcement and her family continued to search. American Airlines hired a private investigator for a few months, but they weren't able to find out any more information. Meanwhile, Joe Dabney eventually went back to his home. He was completely devastated and didn't want to eat. He couldn't even bear to open the suitcase from the trip because his wife was the last one to close them. Joe Dabney would file a lawsuit against American Airlines in 2002 for $10 million and then increased it to $75 million. It accused the airline of gross negligence, breach of contract, and incompetence. They alleged that American Airlines misidentified Margie as an unaccompanied minor instead of a patient, gave him an escort who didn't speak English, and that the escort bullied him using a racial epithet and had him get on the airplane against his will. The airlines responded and said that Margie boarded the plane with a special needs badge, but that no one had recalled seeing her wearing it as she walked off the aircraft in Dallas. They said that Joe only mentioned her Alzheimer's to the attendant after she didn't emerge from the restroom. The airlines did say that the aide may not have realized that he was responsible for both of the Dabneys that day. The airline also said that Margie wore no medical ID bracelet, and they brought up that she'd wandered off before. It was while her husband went to the restroom at a Greyhound bus depot not long ago while living in Bakersfield. Margie would be gone for 3 days that time before she was found. The airline said they were not made aware by Joe Dabney of his wife's proclivity to wander off. They also claimed that relatives had given the okay to send Joe back to California on a later 3 p.m. flight that day, and that the airlines had offered him a free flight back to Texas. The lawsuit was settled in March of 2003 between Joe Dabney and American Airlines, but the details of the settlement were not disclosed. Margie Dabney's disappearance brought to life the agonizing struggle that patients, caretakers, and family members deal with that are doing their best to live and care for those with Alzheimer's. Another topic it would bring up is, should the family have been more specific in telling the airlines about her diagnosis and past times that she'd wandered off? As far as the aide, it was never thought that he did anything out of malice, but that still didn't bring Margie back. A 5'2" woman who weighed only 95 pounds was lost in a sea of people in one of the busiest airports in the world, and months later, everyone was mystified that she still could not be located. Years would go by with no new information of Margie and no sightings to investigate. Then in November of 2007, the Army Corps of Engineers was conducting a controlled burn of some acres near the dam at Louisville Lake in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, about 15 miles from the airport. They discovered some human remains that were completely skeletonized. Then in October of 2008, the Army Corps of Engineers were back to burn several acres of the dam when near the same area as the remains were found a year prior, they found clothing and some personal effects, including a bus pass, AARP card, and an American Airlines tag. When they looked at the effects, they had the name of Marjorie Dabney on it. The clothes found also matched what Margie was last seen in, and DNA tests would eventually confirm the sad news. Margie Dabney had finally been found. Although the remains were skeletal, they were sent for an autopsy. The details of the autopsy were released in November of 2008, and everyone was shocked at their results. The Tarrant County Medical Examiner ruled her death a homicide. They said that she died of a head injury, more specifically blunt force trauma to the head. Fractures on the skull indicated that she had been shot or struck in the head and did not fall accidentally, according to the ME. They were not able to determine when Margie died or if she was killed, where her remains were found or brought thereafter. As you can imagine, Margie's family was completely shattered to hear that she was murdered. Family members would report that Joe Dabney was in disbelief. They had hoped that someone had found her and been caring for her. They would have even been prepared if she had passed away due to some of her health issues. But to hear this news, that hope was now destroyed to be reunited with her, and they now had to grieve their wife and mother, knowing that she had met a violent death. The Louisville police would open a homicide investigation after the ME released their findings. They reviewed evidence from the airport's investigation from 2001. Some of the evidence included a report that Margie was seen wandering on the tarmac and walking on a service road a day or two after she was in the terminal. The airport claims that these sightings were never substantiated. Police did admit that it would be a challenge to investigate now due to the time that had elapsed. They said that trace evidence left at the scene is gone and that people's memories fade. There really hasn't been any information that I could find concerning Margie Dabney's murder since they revealed the autopsy results. I'm sure law enforcement did the best they could, but considering the crime wasn't even known until 7 years after it happened, I'm sure it pretty much started out cold. It appears that Joe Dabney is now deceased. I'm not sure exactly when, but in an article from 2023, they referred to him as Margie's late husband. Joining me once again to discuss what could have happened, I have my friend Clinton Daniel. So, Clinton, I'm sure that you agree this is such a heartbreaking case. The seemingly innocuous trip turned out so horrible. So, do you think that American Airlines is mainly at fault here, or are there other factors that contributed?
Oh, yeah. In my opinion, I think that American Airlines carries significant responsibility here because, from what we know, they were made aware before the trip that she was a high risk. You know, she has advanced stage Alzheimer's, and even ADA standards, which would have been applicable for that time, they would still have had an obligation to make sure that she was provided with reasonable accommodations. So, yeah, definitely. I think that the assumption initially by the airline and their staff was maybe she was just lost, temporarily in the airport. And they seemed comfortable just letting Joe, the husband, go back. And just looking back at it so many years later, all of it just looks complicit on their end.
Yeah, and they kept denying that he even told them that she had Alzheimer's. They said that he didn't tell them till after she went missing.
Yeah, I don't buy that. And we know the daughter was involved too, and I just don't buy that.
Yeah, plus they should have given them 2 aides. There were 2 people, then they each needed extra help. And they thought that one that, had a not good, well, according to Joe, didn't speak English very well. That could have been another factor. But they could have at least sent him one for each, each person.
Yeah, I mean, okay, we know, like, airports, they're chaotic environments. There's sensory overloads as is. But she definitely was a wanderer. She had a history of wandering off. She had done that, I believe it was in California. And again, we know with her daughter, she was having some problems adjusting in Indiana. So there was this documented impairment. And I really, like you said, the airline really failed here. They should have had someone that was thoroughly trained with dealing with someone with this level of cognitive disability.
Yeah, because the American Airlines went in defense mode right away. I mean, I'm sure they were sorry, but I don't even remember reading that. It was just, well, he didn't tell us. He didn't tell us that she had wandered off. So it was just covering themselves. And of course, I'm sure it was their idea to settle out of court. We don't know how even that was for.
Yeah, like even earlier media accounts, it just seems like it was a few days after the disappearance until it even hit the media, at least until it hit the newspapers. So to me, they could have done more. They could have. I don't think we had Silver Alert at the time, which is I don't know if it's but there was just so much they could have done, even with billboards here in the Metroplex, just to communicate something instantly that something was wrong.
Yeah, supposedly a pilot saw her in a restricted area, a couple of days after? It's like, how many days was she on site?
Yeah, it wasn't she sighted, I believe, in the tarmac area? Was that what you
I believe so. And someone thinks that they saw her at a convenience store, and, that makes sense. He even described her clothing, or she was picking up cans. I could see all of those scenarios happening.
Yeah.
So if you had to guess the scenario that played out after Margie wandered off, what do you think happened?
Well, I think that, with someone with Alzheimer's, there's going to be a lot of confusion at times where, it's around, times and locations that they may be confused. And I think in this kind of situation, she had probably easy access to just leave the airport. I think she may have believed mistakenly that she was already in California, and maybe she mistakenly just got off. She went through the exit area. That would have been very accessible for her, and she probably, and my best guess would be that she left to go find her home or her husband.
And let me add that you've actually been to this airport, so you can kind of weigh in on exactly what you think happened, because you have a little bit more knowledge.
Yeah, so I live in the Metroplex. I grew up in this area, and this was the airport that we used growing up, and I would use it now too. It is, I believe, the second largest airport in the United States, and it is the third largest airport in the world. So it's above, London. It's just a huge airport with lots of terminals. So even in 2000 or 2001, it was still a very significant airport.
Yeah. I can see, there's tens of thousands of people. It sounds crazy that she goes missing in a sea of people, but on the other hand, she could easily be missed. They're not going to think twice about seeing a woman walking around the airport property.
No, and people travel in all sorts of conditions. People travel, some travel in their pajamas, and some people travel in business suits. So even if she did not look like what you would expect a typical traveler to look like, she could still be missed, and I think that's just unfortunate.
And you do have a relative with Alzheimer's, so you might be able to say kind of what, your theory about her thinking that she was in California. That's a really good theory.
Yeah, recently, I would say around Thanksgiving back in November, a few months ago, I went to go visit my grandmother. She lives about an hour and a half from here, and she doesn't remember my name anymore. She knows who I am, but she will ask you, what's your name? And I said, and she's in her 80s, and she lives in a facility. And I said something about, that I lived back in DFW, and she said, that she was thinking about moving there, and that her and her friend had discussed moving here. And I said, who's your friend? And she said, my friend lives up the street. And she was just completely confused. She was probably thinking about something that happened 60 years ago. So having that kind of experience, and then reading what we read about Margie, I just saw a lot of that confusion. That's really what I see happening.
Yeah. Are you surprised that she wasn't able to be found before she left the property? Because they started searching fairly quickly after.
No, I think I read where we have close to, I believe it's like 80-something thousand travelers a day here. So that would not surprise me. I think the airport is just chaotic.
Yeah. Is there a highway near the airport that would have been easy for Margie to get to?
So there are highways. We have interstates, highways, and yeah, DFW has tons of that, and that would have been somewhat accessible. But I think that those highways are mostly restricted. I had to do a little bit of research here because I thought it was illegal to be a pedestrian on highways in Texas, but it's actually not. But if she were to walk on the highway, by law, she would have had to go opposite of ongoing traffic. So she would be easy to spot, and I think people here, or really anyone, would be sympathetic if they saw an elderly woman walking on the side of the highway alone. If you're thinking about the scenario, it's hard to imagine no one contacting law enforcement.
Yeah, and there was just a few sightings of a woman picking up cans.
Yeah.
So what do you think ultimately happened to Margie to get her to where she was found?
I personally, I think there's a lot of room for error as far as what we found out through the medical examiner.
Yes.
I think that I would like to suspect that maybe she willingly left the airport. We have shuttles, we have car rental vans, we have taxis. Of course, this is way before Uber. She could have just jumped on a cab and maybe, tried to find where she lived, and maybe the cab driver realized that she didn't have funds to pay, because if you have Alzheimer's, you're most likely not going to have money on you. Yeah. And maybe she was just let off somewhere and she wondered. I'd kind of wondered maybe if she got agitated. And I would hate to think of a scenario where she even acted out in a way that would result in maybe an altercation between her and someone else. But I have to keep that in mind too.
Oh, so do you think that she was murdered, or do you think there's a chance this was accidental?
So I think both. I think that it's hard to tell which one, but knowing that people with Alzheimer's, it's easy for them to get agitated, especially in environments that they're not accustomed to. So if she were somewhere completely, at night alone, what if she acted out in a way and someone reacted not realizing she was, it could have been just a fight or something. And I even hate to speculate about that, but something could have happened there. But also, she could have just wandered and died of something like exposure or dehydration too.
Yeah, because the skull and the fractures, I mean, we don't know. It was the medical examiner's opinion. They did not come from accidental, but so many things could have happened.
Yeah,
and I don't think
absolutely.
It's unreal to think that she could have she was an active person, and it was 15 miles from the airport.
15,
Yeah, how many days? She could have been walking for days for all we know.
Yep, she could. And I think that would probably be the best scenario. I mean, as a family member, to just know that that's what happened. It wasn't a violent. And I had kind of looked at the other option, which is that maybe her body was discarded. But I would hate to think about that, just being someone at her age, and her level of vulnerability is high.
And she had her belongings with her. That tends to make me more think that she could have died where she was found.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because there's been speculation that she was hit by a car, but I don't think someone's going to load the body up in their car, drive her out in the country. I mean, then they'd have evidence in their car.
Yeah, and we know the items that she was found with, and I can't remember exactly what they were, but
yeah, it was like an AARP card, and it may have been it was just a few random things. It wasn't anything of any value.
Yeah, to me, those are just things that were probably with her on the flight, maybe just something she had in her purse. But when I thought about that, I thought that kind of discounts the theory that she was found days later, at a store getting cans, because Alzheimer's patients are not, you can't give them my own situation, we're not able to give, a cell phone or something to, my grandmother, she won't wear a wedding ring because she would lose it, so she wears costume jewelry instead. And if she were to wander for a few days, I don't see her having the wherewithal to carry those items for those many days, which makes me think that whatever happened to her quickly after her departure from the airport.
Yeah, I wish we knew more details about when she wandered off in California, where she was gone for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious who found her, how she got along, how did she eat?
Yeah.
Because that might answer some questions about this time as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've not even really considered that. But yeah, I mean, she would have had to know how to, defend herself for 3 days and how to just survive 3 days. So yeah, that's a very good point.
Well, this case, I mean, there's somewhat of a resolution. At least they know where she is, but it's just so heartbreaking. And so I feel bad for the husband.
Yeah, and I absolutely do not fault the family at all. There's just and I don't know, it was probably worse then than what it is now, but the resources for families and with family members with Alzheimer's, it's just very limited. And even we know, like, caregiver stress, it could actually kill the caregiver just because it's so stressful for them, because they can't even think about their own health. They're continually thinking about, and I want to make a clear point.
That was him, because he kept putting off his hip surgery.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just everything we researched with this, in no instant did I ever think, the family could have done something different. Just him flying alone back to Indiana to pick up his wife says a lot about him as a husband, says a lot about the daughter. We know that the daughter, when she was unable to care for Margie in Indiana, she had tried, but Margie there were some issues with her trying to wander off, and that was a concern. But even when Margie became lost at the airport, we know that the daughter came home. I believe the daughter's name was Candace, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
She had came back to Texas, and she had rented a car, and she went without, even unable to pay her car payment in the very beginning, just because she was looking for her mom. So she tried everything she could And it's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, she's the one that was out hanging up most of the flyers.
Absolutely, yeah. And we know that the airport eventually did help her financially as far as getting a rental car and accommodation, but even if they didn't, she still started the process early. So I think that just says a lot about their family.
Yeah, I can't imagine her husband. I mean, can you imagine the panic when he was put on a plane to fly back to California, knowing that she was missing?
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine, especially at that age when you're not as mobile as what you were when you were in your 20s or 30s. You know, he was very limited in what he could do, especially once he was back in California. So,
he was pretty much at their mercy because he was trying to get the guy to stop, but, I think they said they did let him wait a little bit. They put him on a flight that afternoon, they claim.
Yeah, that's just... The airline really could have done something way different. And sending him back that day, that was a poor choice.
And let me say, this was not long after the 9/11.
No.
And so they're even more lax after. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. It doesn't look good for the airline. I mean, we know that I believe with the lawsuit, they did not disclose the amount in the end. Is that correct?
Yeah, they did not disclose it.
Yeah. So they definitely went into damage mode, and you can only hope.
Yeah, I would hope at least that they had all these, things changed after poor Margie had to go through this. That the next time they hear Alzheimer's with a passenger, that they pay attention and they have all these steps that they need to follow.
Oh, absolutely. There needs to be formal protocols, and I would hope now that they have trained agents, maybe trained agents in English, Spanish, and what other languages we maybe have. But there needs to be documentation, too. If you're transferring someone, you need to document everything. If the person's no longer in your possession, then where did that person go? And, I hope that they really improve their training.
And it's sweet, but it's sad. The couple had the mindset, well, as long as we're stay together, we'll be okay. I mean, they thought they could take care of each other.
Yeah.
But, Margie wasn't Margie, when that takes over someone's brain. So.
Yeah.
Well, Quentin, thanks so much for joining me to discuss this sad case. And I'm sure we will be hearing from you again. So
we'll talk later. I appreciate talking to you so much.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
I want to briefly mention 2 other cases where people disappeared at airports. These 2 have very different facts, but the circumstances are as unsettling as they are tragic. Ironically, although several years apart, both of these cases would occur at the same airport. Wayne Grosserhode was 39 years old and lived with his wife Vicky and daughters Ashley 8 and Kelsey 4. In the spring of 1993, he moved his family to Lenexa, Kansas, where he would become an assistant vice president in systems development with Sprint. Vicky Grosserhode would report her husband missing in late February of 1994. She had advised the police to check the Kansas City International Airport for his car. Police did find the car a few days later on February 25th at the airport in the Terminal B garage. They assumed that he had left town, so they did not look inside. With still no clues as to why her husband disappeared or where he was, Vicky Grosserhode went to view the car with authorities on Wednesday, March 2nd, a full week after the car was discovered. When they opened the trunk for her, they were horrified to find Wayne Grosserhode inside. They were unable to perform an autopsy on him because his body was frozen and partially decomposed. Combined with that and no visible injuries on his body, police theorized that he committed suicide. They said the only drug in Grosserhode's system was an allergy medication. Law enforcement's theory was that he was apparently naked and crawled into his trunk, shut it, and froze to death. His car key was found in a pocket in his clothing. There is not any follow-up information as to whether his wife agreed with that theory or a possible reason why he may have chosen to end his life in such a bizarre way. Now, the second case I want to mention takes place in the same area, this time in 2018. Randy and Carolina Potter lived in Lenexa, Kansas. Randy was a project engineer at T-Mobile, and his wife Carolina worked as a flight attendant for the East Coast flights out of KCI. Randy Potter had taken several days off to stay home with their son Matthew, who was sick. Randy had planned on returning to work on January 17th. He had laid his clothes out the night before, as he normally did. That morning, Randy Potter awoke at the usual time, and his son heard him feed the dogs. After that, nothing really makes any sense. Around 7 a.m., Potter left for work in his company-issued 2014 white Dodge Ram pickup truck. A few hours later, the family received a call from T-Mobile asking where Randy was, as he was not at work. When Carolina Potter went home, she found Randy's work clothes still there, but his pajamas and slippers were gone. This was out of character, so on January 17, 2017, the family reported him missing. The family would also search for Randy. They thought that perhaps he had flown somewhere. They drove 45 minutes to the Kansas City International Airport and looked through the parking lot. They gave the airport police the license plate number of Randy's truck. They were told the parking lot would be checked regularly, as the airport police recorded the plate number of every vehicle in the lot. Lenexa police had checked with federal authorities, and there was no record that Randy had flown anywhere or left the country. Randy Potter seemed to have dropped off the face of the earth. There were no leads and no sightings. Then on September 12, 2017, police received a report of a foul smell coming from a vehicle at the KCI airport. It was parked in Economy Lot B, 2.5 miles north of the terminal buildings. Inside the truck, they found a body covered with a blanket so decomposed that its race or sex could not be determined. They also found a gun and a parking lot entry dated January 17th. The vehicle was soon determined to be Randy Potter's missing work truck, and the gun was his that he usually kept at home. The medical examiner would rule the death a suicide and also determine the identity. Randy Potter had now been found. Of course, there was disbelief and anger from Randy's family. Even after his wife telling them to go check the airport, they still let a truck sit there unnoticed for months. The truck just didn't go unnoticed, but also Randy's body, even though many people would have to walk by it every day. It would take one person smelling a decomposing body to finally give this family the answer as to where their loved one was. Randy's widow would sue SP Plus Corporation, the company charged with monitoring the airport's parking lot, on behalf of herself and her 2 children for extreme trauma and emotional stress. The lawsuit also alleged that blood pooled on the pavement around the area of Potter's truck and flies buzzed in the area. The case was sent to federal court, but then remanded back to Platte County Circuit Court. However, I couldn't find any further information about the lawsuit, such as whether it was dismissed or a settlement was reached. I will quickly give my thoughts on these 2 tragic disappearances. I think that it is especially egregious that they would happen at the exact same airport. First off, how hard is it to check the trunk of a car of someone who was reported missing? Although years apart, you would think after letting Wayne Grosserhode's body sit in his trunk decomposing for a week after being found, would have made them at the least more diligent in creating stricter protocols in missing person situations at that airport. However, instead of getting better, the KCI airport would get worse. Not even noticing a truck sitting there in the exact same spot for 8 months, even though the family was told that the airport parking lots were monitored daily. It was tragic enough that these 2 men chose to end their lives, but the circumstances of their bodies being left to decompose just added to the family's pain. While researching cases of people going missing at airports, I came across a few other cases that, although they are not missing, had some strange details that I wanted to share. One of them actually involves another airport in Kansas City. In the summer of 2013, construction worker Jeremy Burke was digging a trench for a runway drainage project at Wheeler Downtown Airport in Kansas City, Kansas. He would at first unearth a skull, then soon after parts of a leg and a dozen teeth. All they could tell was he was a male Caucasian, 5'9", between 35 to 55 years of age. They would send the remains off for further testing to try to determine its identity. Their initial estimate was that he died between 1863 and 1913. If his remains are that old, the area he was found was on or near land once owned by two of the city's founding families. As you can imagine, not knowing how long he was there, and some of the estimates being within a 50-year range, the possibilities are endless. One theory that I found particularly interesting was about a man named Nick Ergovic. Ergovic was a politically connected bail bondsman who in 1955 parked his Buick near the main terminal of the Wheeler Airport, bought a one-way ticket to St. Louis on TWA Flight 138, and was never heard from again. The missing man's family had said that they don't believe that he ever boarded the plane at Wheeler Airport, and they think that he could have been the victim of a mob hit. Ergovic would not fit within the time estimate that they think the remains had been there, but they admit they really can't say for sure how old the remains are. Although they are still investigating, it is unsure whether we will know the identity of, as he is referred to, Mystery Man under Runway 1. The last case I will talk about is just incredibly sad and a case that I had never heard of before. 14-year-old Keith Sapsford lived in Australia and was going through a troubled time and had been wanting to see the world. His foster father, Charles Sapsford, described Keith as having itchy feet. He said that his wife and him had even taken his son around the world, hoping the trip would satisfy him, but he continued to run away. It didn't appear the trip did anything to stop Keith's desire to travel. A few months earlier, his father would recount to him a story in the news about a boy from Spain who died hiding in the undercarriage of an aircraft. He explained to his son the dangers of exposure to high altitude and the moving parts of the plane. However, Keith's mind was apparently set. Their son's running away had gotten bad enough that his parents felt they had no alternative but to send him to Boys Town in hopes that they would straighten him out. Unfortunately, after only a few weeks, Keith would run off from the Boys Town in Engadine, a suburb of Sydney, on Saturday, February 19, 1970. He was reported missing the next day. The rest of the story is what the airport police have pieced together. Keith traveled to the Sydney airport, where he apparently climbed up the wheel of a Douglas DC-8 Japan Airlines jet bound for Tokyo. It appears that he climbed up there several hours before it took off. They believe that he hid in the empty wheel housing, probably on the 5-by-10-foot door of the compartment. This door is closed while the plane is on the ground and the wheels are down. The next thing that they believed happened is that when the door was opened after takeoff so the wheel could be retracted, Keith tragically fell to his death. Airline officials said that even if Keith had not fallen from the plane ending his life, he would have died within 90 minutes after the plane took off for Japan. He would have either been crushed by the wheel when it was retracted or would have been killed by the cold or lack of oxygen. So after this tragic death, this case takes an unexpected, chilling turn. Amateur photographer John Gilpin was at the airport photographing planes, as he had a habit of doing. He didn't see Keith Sapsford fall that day, or even learn of the tragedy that happened while he was there. However, a week later, he was developing his film and was horrified at what he saw. John Gilpin had unknowingly photographed Keith Sapsford literally as he fell out of the plane to his death. Working on true crime as often as, and as long as I have, it takes a lot to shake me. But this photo is very disturbing. especially knowing that a 14-year-old boy is literally falling to their death. I considered putting the picture in the article form of this podcast on my website, but I just couldn't do it. That being said, if your curiosity is piqued and you want to see it, all you need to do is Google Keith Sapsford and you'll be able to find it easily. So there you have some tragic cases that happened at the airport. These cases varied in the ways that they happened, which just goes to show that so many strange occurrences can happen there. A few of these cases, sadly, have all the resolution they're going to get, but there is always hope that the person responsible for Margie Dabney's death and the identity of the mystery man under runway 1 can be discovered. Then we could have some closure on these airport atrocities. That concludes my podcast on airport atrocities. A special thank you to my friend Clinton Daniel for joining me to discuss the case of Margie Dabney. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave me a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find me on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube Music. You can find all of my originals as well as links to my most recent podcasts on my website at Lost and Found Blogs. I also have social media pages under that name on Facebook, X, and Instagram. I have a Patreon page where I post exclusive podcasts on lesser-known missing persons cases. You can reach me via email at lostandfoundpodcast@yahoo. And remember that cold cases stay cold because their story stops getting told.